Hi, how's everybody's cerebellum doing? Like number 10 here. Before I start, please, a hand for Matthew Carefully, who's just remarkable. Matthew might be the poster child for what I'm about to talk about. And before I talk about what I'm going to talk about, most people who talk about who say the kind of things that I'm going to say have been branded by big media as being anti-creator or somehow, anti, just that we're sort of somehow in the pockets of the tech industry and that we are against creativity, which is absurd. If you are a client of mine or if you've read what I've written or if you know anything about my past, you know I'm anything but anti-creator. I'm going to talk about, that being said, I'm going to talk about the death of copyright law. Most people think they know what copyright law is, and most people, in my experience, are very wrong. It's not some kind of natural right that's been handed down from the cavemen. It doesn't appear in the Bible. It doesn't appear in the Quran. It's an economic bargain that's made as a matter of policy by the government based on the idea that if creators are given a little monopoly in their creation, if they can make some money, they can get paid for their creation, and the government can guarantee it and stand behind it, that's good for society. It's all based on what's good for society. And at some point, the copyright laws, as they are enacted and as they are enforced, once they become no longer in the interest of society, something has got to give, and the copyright laws have to give as a matter of policy. You should understand that copyright laws are only a couple of hundred years old, and the big media companies that are built upon copyright law are all less than 100 years old. Big movies, big print, big music are all roughly 100 years or less old. And the internet and digital media are turning all of these on their heads. More than 100 years ago, copyright law wasn't that important. It protected books, it protected maps, it protected things like that. But generally, there was no mass media to protect. I mean, people's idea of culture, was going to a concert, a live concert, or going to a live vaudeville hall, or when there was nothing going on, gathering in the parlor and singing. I remember, my parents sometimes having parties where everybody would gather around the piano and sing. Now imagine, if you will, those of you who are parents, telling your kids, okay, now we're going to all go into the parlor and stand around the piano and sing. But this was a major way of people entertaining themselves, and this was a major conduit of culture. Copyright has become, through mass media, something that the Cato Institute, in a remarkable white paper that they issued about 5 years ago, the Cato Institute of all people, came out on the side of the diminishment of copyright. And they referred to what has been going on historically as imperial copyright, where every aspect of how your culture was created and got to you was controlled by a few people, and that the rest of us were simply passive consumers. But the creation, the distribution, the editing of culture just was landed on your lap. You went to a bookstore and you bought what books were there. You went to a record store, you bought what books were there. You went to a movie theater, you watched what movies were there, and you really you had a very narrow set of choices. And all of that stuff, and pretty much everything that's ever been created by mass media, because of the way the copyright laws have worked, are owned by a few people, and that ownership is extremely, extremely powerful. The right to reproduce, the right to distribute, the right to create derivative works, the right to monkey around with a work and turn it into something new. And over time, more things became subject to copyright. Copyright duration got greater, thanks to the Sonny Bono Copyright Term Extension Act of 1998, one of the greatest named pieces of legislation in the history of the world. That came into being because the early Mickey Mouse cartoon, Steamboat Willie, was coming to the end of its copyright run, and Disney prevailed on Congress to extend everybody's copyright and everything that's ever been created for 20 years, just so Disney could get another 20 years out of Mickey Mouse. And it became actually easier in the late 70s to get a copyright. In fact, you didn't have to do anything to get federal copyright. You just had to create something. There was no more requirement that you publish. There was no more requirement that you registered your copyright. Just simply by someone creating something, they had the full force of federal law behind them. And, and a lot of this was brought on by the big media companies. And can you blame them? I mean, if we were in their position, we would all probably do the same thing because it's in our self-interest. I'm going to talk about what's happened primarily with music because music and digital media has been on the forefront. I think every other medium is going to be affected like music has to a greater or lesser degree, probably to a lesser degree. But music is really the big kahuna in terms of the changes. The music industry was doing very, very well in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. It was started doing well in the 60s when the Beatles and others brought in the idea of an album rather than a single. They were selling millions and millions and millions. Started doing really well in the 80s when CDs came along. Because CDs, they love CDs because the music industry thought, well, this is a very high-tech solution, and no one will ever be able to copy them. No one will ever be able to make their own CD. That's what they thought in the 80s. And people loved them because they were durable, more durable than vinyl, and they were portable. You could play them in your car. And if you didn't listen really hard, they sounded much better than vinyl to most people. So not only could they sell you the current hits, but the record industry could also sell you on CD your music library all over again. Because all of us came to that point, at some point where we looked at our vinyl records and said, these just got to go, and off they went. Or down to the basement, in my case, just down to the basement. And then you started buying CDs of albums that you already had, so you're buying the same stuff twice. Some of us, the maniacs among us, then you bought it again in the 90s when they came out with the remastered versions with the special bonus tracks. And you're going, oh my God, I got to get the Elvis Costello, playing in his bathtub. I got to, playing, So you go and you buy the remastered with the bonus track. So you're buying records a third time. And this was great for the music industry. And every time there was some kind of insurgency, the DIY, in the late 70s, the punk DIY movement got co-opted by the music industry. They cherry-picked the best acts and then started creating their own phony punk acts during the big grunge scare of the early 90s. Nirvana comes out, and they get latched onto, and suddenly, everybody with long hair in Seattle and a flannel shirt, whether or not they're a musician or not, got signed to a major record deal because they co-opted that. And so the record industry was getting more and more consolidated. There were less companies. Radio got consolidated. The ownership rules got loosened. So pretty soon there was basically one big FM radio station across the country with one playlist. And from that begat boy bands. Then we suddenly had boy bands in the mid to late 90s. And think about what boy bands did. I mean, they would put out a record, and at midnight, every shopping mall in America was packed with minivans, and little teenage girls were lined up outside. So when the doors opened at midnight, they would run in and buy the latest thing from NSYNC or from the New Kids on the Block or whoever. By the time the sun came up, these records would be like double platinum, triple platinum. And by the end of the week, they would have sold 5 or 6 million. That doesn't happen anymore. I mean, this week we had the first million-seller debut, I think, in over a year with Taylor Swift. And I think that only happened because there's a country crossover, and country fans tend to buy more physical products, don't download as much. But within the last 2 months, there have been #1 records in this country that have sold less than 60,000. That's where we're at now. And you compare that to 2 or 3 million before the sun comes up. What happened? Well, along comes this thing called the internet and digital technology and MP3s. And in the late 90s, a 19-year-old kid invented this thing called Napster. And all the college kids went, wow, free music. Not only that, but we're getting music in the format we want it. We want it on MP3s so we can put it in little things we can carry around in our pockets. Let's do this. The industry at that point had a chance, to go in and co-opt it. They had a chance. Napster was begging them to go into business with them, and they refused. Instead, they decided they would just, sue Napster into oblivion. It took them 2 years to do that, and by the time it was over, they killed Napster, but they had completely lost the war. Kids and adults alike were now used to getting music for free on the internet. We're used to getting music downloaded. It wasn't until 2 years later when finally they allowed the iTunes store to open that you could even get digital music. And for a long time, the digital music you could buy for 99 cents a track was all gummed up with all sorts of protective devices so you couldn't make copies or share it with your friends or whatnot. So at this point, we've got a couple of generations of consumers who, the idea of buying recorded music is totally alien to them. And it didn't have to be that way. I mean, the record companies could have done something in the year 2000 or in the year 1999 to co-opt that, and they simply didn't. And it did happen that fast. I mean, it was all over by 2001 or 2002. The record companies have struggled ever since to try to fight the battle. I mean, they sued Napster, they sued the progeny of Napster, they sued Grokster, and they sued LimeWire, and they sued this and that. When none of that seemed to be working, they started suing their own target demographic. They started suing college kids, and I represented a whole bunch of them. 40,000 of their own consumers got sued for downloading music for free, notwithstanding the fact that the kids that were downloading music for free, study after study has shown that those are the biggest customers of legitimate sales of music. So they basically were going and suing their own best customers, scaring the bejesus out of them, and turning them into then radicalized non-consumers of legitimate music. And they've tried, over and over again to come up with some way to stop people from doing this. And as soon as they come up with some kind of block, as soon as the industry with all their scientists and all their coders and all their programmers come up with some kind of block for downloading free music, some kid in a dorm room in Stanford or at RPI disables it, usually within 5 minutes or so. They'll come and they'll announce, their latest thing, and then some kid will go, oh, no, wrong, and there it goes. They just don't seem to understand that free music is here to stay, that there's not too much they can do to fix it. Musicians, however, have latched onto this, at least the savvy musicians, that the free movement of music can be very, very good for their career. I found this out in a very personal, direct way when I was preparing to give a talk at Albany Law School in the year 2000. Napster was brand new. It was a few months old. And I decided, well, let's look and see what this thing is all about. And in my own mind, I'd been watching the growth of MP3s for a number of years, and I was very excited. I could tell that there was something happening. But in my own mind, I wasn't, 100% sure. I kind of liked it. But on the other hand, some of you may know I was in a band in the early 80s, and we had some records out, and we had a little bit of success. We didn't make any money, but we got to be kind of notorious. And so I download, and I'm thinking, well, if they're, everybody's trading this music for free, I'm not getting paid. Not that I was getting paid anything anyways, but it was hypothetical not getting paid. And so I download the Napster program, and I install it on my computer. I'm at work. And I did what probably everybody does who's ever had a record out. I typed in the name of my band, and I'm thinking, let's see how bad it is. Let's see how much money I'm losing today. Let's see who's reaching into my pockets and taking, And so I type in the name of my band, and I press search, and it's blinking. And all of a sudden, I got this white hot feeling. I'm like, how the hell am I going to feel if we're not on there? I mean, what would you rather have? And it just, all of a sudden, it's like, well, there it is. There's a band, Phantogram. I'll just name them. They're clients of mine. They're breaking nationwide right now. They're from Saratoga Springs. Their biggest break happened about a year ago when their record company called me up and said, you're not going to believe what just happened. Starbucks is going to give away 100,000 tracks. And I said, wow, what are they going to pay it for it? They're not going to pay us anything for it. They're giving away 100,000 songs. And this was the big break, that around Christmas season, Starbucks would give away 100,000 download codes for a Phantogram song, and that people would go, inevitably go get them. They got them at Starbucks, so it's got that Starbucks, in premature on it. And this did actually help break the band. There were now 100,000 copies of a Phantogram song in people's iPods on people's computers that people were listening to, that people were sharing, and the buzz was out. And this was 100,000 that they didn't sell. This was 100,000 that they gave away. The internet basically, eviscerates the barrier to entry. People talk about, well, how can you just give it away? What are you nuts? How are you going to make money? And believe me, It hurts me to say this because anything that causes non-musicians to give money to musicians, I think, is a good thing. And we're talking about, one of those things disappearing. But it is what it is. In the words of Eric Garland, who runs the company Big Champagne, who's made a fortune, by the way, telling major labels who's downloading stuff illegally, and major labels pay a lot of money for that because it's a better indicia of who's popular than the major labels' own sales. But Eric Garland pointed out a few years ago, if you can't get people to listen to your music for free, don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get them to pay more money for it. That's just not going to work. And as I tell my clients in all mediums, and they ask me about, well, what about this internet? If I put stuff on there, what's going to happen? I said, don't worry if you put stuff on the internet that people are going to steal your work. Be worried that they won't. That's the more critical thing to think about. And so what's the upshot? Musicians have to use their music as a vehicle for other things, for playing live, for creating relationships. For perhaps getting their music. I mean, I remember everybody used to complain about musicians selling out. That's no longer the case. You want your stuff to be in movies. You want your stuff to be in commercials. It can be done in a way that doesn't embarrass you. I heard Damian Kulash from OK Go talking about getting $300,000 from some corporation to make one of their incredible videos, which are the things that really float them when they go out and they sell sold-out tours. People love to see these videos, and he said, we won't do product placement in the videos. We'll put we'll acknowledge them somewhere on the website, and we tell these corporate sponsors that 4 million people are going to see your logo, but we're not going to put it in the video because we won't go that far. If we could do it in a way that was tasteful and goofy and in keeping with who we are, we might think about it, but we're not going to do it automatically. Selling out is a relative thing. Getting paid is an absolute thing. People are saying, well, in the movie sense, people are saying, oh my God, there's going to be no more $200 million movies. Well, whoever said that was the standard? There may not be any more $500,000 albums. There may not be any more Steely Dan's, bands that sequester themselves in the studio for 4 years and are devoid of personality and have no relationship with their fans and put out great sounding records that everybody goes buys. There may not be any bands like that in the future, but there's going to be a lot of Matthew Carefullys. There's going to be a lot of people that make music on their own. There's going to be a lot of Phantograms who are wizards who are up in Greenwich, New York in a barn making great records and having real relationships with their fans. It's evolutionary. There's nothing you can do to stop it, and I'm running out of time, so thank you very much. Thank you.